Grumman Airfield at Calverton, Long Island, USA, a flight of F-14 combat airplanes, the most sophisticated on Earth, prepares for takeoff. The date, January 24th, 1976. The destination, Iran, some 7,000 miles away. The purpose, to deliver a credible air defense system to one of the world's most strategically located nations. The challenge, not merely to produce and to deliver the airplanes, but to support and to maintain them as well in a harsh, rugged environment.
5152 ground cruise, claim that you look good and you can take position out on the runway at your discretion and you go for
The flame of the afterburners is the glow of technology, but not of the ordinary sort. This is high technology. Technology, as we've all come to realize, is no simple matter. Even as it fills certain needs, it raises an inevitable challenge. And the higher it moves, the greater the challenge it creates. How then do you introduce the leading edge of man's highest technologies, embodied in the single package of a combat airplane, to one of the world's still developing nations that has moved in our own generation from the old pastoral traditions to the urbanization and the industrialization that inevitably produce rapid change and cultural shock? Iran, 7,000 miles from the United States, sits at the crossroads of different and differing nations. To her east, the Indian subcontinent. To her west, the Arab world. To her north, the Soviet Union. To her south, the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. These warm waters Russia has coveted since the days of the Tsar. Iran's oil pays for her rapid urbanization and industrialization. But neither Iran nor any other country can buy high technology with money alone. It must also invest her human capital in the specific training and eventual understanding that technology imposes. And that is why the Grumman Aerospace Corporation, designer and manufacturer of the F-14, nicknamed the Tomcat, faced a far bigger task than simply delivering the airplanes and support equipment Iran had ordered. It also faced the training challenge. And Grumman was further contracted by the United States government itself to provide the design and construction criteria for the facilities the new airplanes would need in Iran. This involved, first of all, a new Iranian air base that was to rise from scratch, in toto from the desert floor itself, just outside the major city of Isfahan, in the center of Iran, as well as modifications and improvements to existing air bases in Tehran and Shiraz. This would mean, in time, truly enormous air defense logistics, involving the delivery of 80 F-14s and huge quantities of supporting hardware and training equipment, certain major modifications to the airplanes themselves by Grumman personnel, and many other endeavors to support the program. It would all mean, in a matter of months, the installation of truly up-to-date facilities for Iran's air defense, hangars and supply depots, operation, maintenance and training facilities at various bases. The contract also called on Grumman to oversee the design and construction of housing, indeed of entire communities, not only for the Grumman people who would train the Iranian Air Force in the uses of the F-14, but also for all U.S. contractors, for certain U.S. government personnel, and indeed even for some non-U.S. personnel and contractors participating in the F-14 program. It was a massive challenge that was rapid in the fulfilling. The work began in the spring of 1975. The Grumman families moved into leased houses and hotels in the city of Isfahan while construction was underway. They began moving into the newly built permanent housing within 6 months after construction began. But as in new homes everywhere, the new residents had a lot of little things to do to put everything in ship-shape order. For some time, the new residents lived amid the continuing construction activities, preparing the way for more new residents. Everything from home building to road laying, from utilities trenches to landscaping. But it all came together. The housing finally contained every stick of furniture, every household appliance, even the last touch of furnishing down to the silverware and ice buckets that one could reasonably expect in the American lifestyle of the mid-1970s in America itself. Grumman, as prime manager of the construction, worked with the government of Iran and with Iranian contractors to create two sizable communities. Isfahan, just northwest of the great Iranian city, and Shahinshah, 5 miles to the north. Both of these communities were built by Iranians to American specifications. They would revert to the Iranian government after the Americans completed their mission and returned home. In the meantime, under Grumman's supervision and overall management, these tiny corners of a foreign field took on the coloration of American suburbia. The landscaped homes, the schools and the stores, the playing fields, even a teenage club and a swimming pool. The schools themselves, from kindergarten through high school, had certified American teachers with experience in the United States as well as abroad. Iran has long been a mingling ground of peoples from the Christian West as from the other lands of the Islamic East, especially in this proud and glorious ancient capital, Isfahan. The Grumman people felt an honest fascination before this rich and ancient culture that flourished long before the Christian era, this Persia that is now Iran.
آقای لوئیس، شما کجا زندگی میکنید؟
من اصفهان زندگی میکنم.
Their father is a farmer.
Their father there.
No translation. English. Louder.
There always has been, and perhaps always will be, a lot for East and West to learn about one another. But there is no greater bond than the shared interests and aspirations toward the better life through the work of the world.
Excellent.
Iranians and Americans came to know and to like one another, perhaps to the surprise of both. Both of our peoples, we all came to discover, are well worth knowing, and a little cultural shock is good for anyone.
Stop me. I just got a phone call from Mrs. White out in Hazar Jarib on Manny Street. With a rainstorm last night, they've had extensive damage to the house. So I would like to go over there and evaluate the damage, but I want to meet the landlord there. Yeah. Would you call him up, please, and see if he can meet us there? Yes, sir. Thank you.
الو آدم خواهش کنم هر چه زودتر تشریف بیارین اونجا من آقای بسیارم میریم شما فکر کنید که میتونی بیارین
Grumman responsibilities cover just about every phase of residential life and leisure in both communities. From basic utilities, transportation, communication, medicine, education and recreation to the ongoing liaison with Iranian businesses and government that made for a smooth running operation. But the prime Grumman support responsibility was the detailed, painstaking creation of a corps of trained Iranian personnel who would, in time, become the masters of the high-technology airplane, even though most of them had only a high school education and no particular background in any of the various technologies that come together in the F-14.
In the manual mode. Then we can start the switch
and put the cover back on.
Here then, at Khatomi Air Base just outside Isfahan, the Iranian Air Force began the journey toward mastery of the Grumman F-14 Tomcat air superiority fighter interceptor. An airplane of all climes and all seasons, built to the pounding rigors and strains of hard carrier landings, and equally adaptable to the driest of dry land, the harsh desertscape of southwestern Asia. An airplane good enough to spot and track an enemy far beyond the range of any other fighter's radar. Good enough to send 6 missiles against 6 targets, while tracking 24 other targets at the same time. Targets dozens, scores, even 100 and more miles away. Good enough, in short, to defeat any threat from any other fighter, from any supersonic bomber, from a cruise missile itself, from mere feet above the sea or the land to 100,000 feet, nearly 20 miles above the earth. But the airplane, the visible, tangible hardware itself, would be incomplete without the invisible, intangible human aspect that goes with it. Understanding, mastery of aircraft, as indeed of all technology, must begin with the basics. But even the basics at this upper exacting level of technology are a collective challenge of a high order. The one word that sums up the thousands of parts that must function as separate systems in this single flying and fighting airplane is maintenance. Maintenance for the airframe itself, and for the thousands of moving parts that must perform precisely and instantaneously on command of the men who fly the airplanes, and for the computerized radar, navigational and weapon systems the pilot and the weapons systems operator deploy in flight and in combat.
We try to get as many people qualified as we can so we can show that eventually they're going to take over all aspects of the job. The goal that we have is we're trying to work ourselves out of a job.
The goal we had was to work ourselves out of a job, but not just in maintenance training, also in training the pilots and the weapon systems operators, the two-man crews who take the F-14s aloft on their missions. There is a lot, not simply to learn, but to master down to the ultimate detail. Given the challenges of flight itself, especially in combat, what you learn here has to become second nature, which is something more, something far more profound than simply learning the facts.
The background of the Iranian pilot is either from F-5s or F-4s. The average flight time is approximately 800 hours, some with as many as 2,000 hours in the F-5. A typical mission will comprise a two-ship flight, and that, of course, would be 4 people. The brief for that mission will ordinarily start about 2.5 hours before flight time. The brief will last about an hour or an hour and 15 minutes. We fly for approximately an hour and 45 minutes for a two-ship flight. We take off individually, rendezvous about 100 miles southeast of the base. We have familiarization flying, basic instrument flying, cross-country flying, radar intercept flying, basic fighting maneuvers, air-to-air gunnery. And we have 4 in-flight refueling flights for each student. We have a number of IIF instructor pilots, NWSOs. There is always an instructor pilot in the front seat of an airplane that there's a student WSO in. We would approach one another using the radar and using the tactics that we've been taught. Then we would break up again and switch roles. One would be the fighter, the good guy, and the other one would be the bad guy, the defensive one. Having done that for about 25 to 30 minutes, we would rendezvous again. We would come back as a flight of 2 and a VFR or instrument approach. We'd then go back to the squadron area, take off our overflight gear, and then go back to the briefing room and debrief the flight. Tell the student what he did right and what we think he did wrong and what can be done to correct it. The debrief is probably the most important portion of the flight. The F-14 is a fine weapon system and they can handle it. And they're going to get better as the time goes on.
Is going to whip up and whip down and possibly hit the aircraft. That's one thing to remember. Okay, and the second thing we want to remember is the skip roping effect. Once you've made contact with the basket and start pushing the hose up, on the left side especially, on the left side of the tanker, you're going to get this skip roping. And once you see it developing, you have to immediately correct for it, and by hitting the left rudder. Skid the aircraft over this way and make the line taut, and it'll stop the skip roping. If you don't do that, what's going to happen is it's going to get worse and worse and worse and could snap off the probe.
To back up Iran's evolving air defense, a major part of the Grumman challenge was the supply of many thousands of different items, parts, materials, and pieces and systems of equipment for the strictly military activities and for the sustenance of the American communities as well. It involved the choice and procurement of goods from hundreds of suppliers in Iran itself, in the United States, in Europe as well, at the best possible prices and within the best possible delivery schedules. Most often, supplies streamed into Iran by air. Hundreds of flights to meet the ongoing needs of this advanced defense program and of the Grumman people who sustained it.
Steady 27 now. Level at 20,000 feet. Bearing is 257.46. Okay, 257. 3 degrees of target aspect now. Bogey speed about 4.
Thus, the Grumman principle. The Grumman idea. Not simply to market and to sell, but to support the purchaser of any and all Grumman products and systems throughout the world.
Message test to light, fire and instrument check. Going to press start procedures. Windshield checker breakers full. Engine crank left.
Moving the control stick in the cockpit forward, this would go 10 degree trailing edge down the maximum. If you lift the control stick back to the center position, this would come up in the neutral position. Holding the control stick all the way up would cause this trailing edge to go up 33 degrees.
Support. To go there, to be there, to remain there as needed. To do what needs doing, from the commonplace to the complex.
Speed brake. Pushing the left rudder pedal would start.
And you're removing the tails, yeah? Okay, as I told you before, there is a caution for removing these two TIT sensors. You do not have to bend it, okay?
Support. To train the user's personnel in the maintenance and the total operation of every Grumman product and system.
At 20.
Okay.
Okay? Do it. I'm bringing the rig suit. Okay. Now, go to emergency mode. Just raise it up. Okay?
Support. Executive project management of the aspects, the details, and the surrounding context to introduce Grumman products and systems anywhere on Earth. Support. The one word that sums up the Grumman commitment to create and to stand behind the leading edge technologies of our time.